You're on.
I'm on. All right, it's good to be back with you again for the third session in our series on conflict resolution. I'm Bryan Austill. My claim to fame is I'm Pastor Carrie's husband, and I'm also a clinical psychologist and retired Methodist clergyman. It seems like I've been getting some pretty good feedback about the last two sessions we've had together, and I'm a little curious about what's been meaningful or helpful to people before I launch into Act 3 here. So if you have some feedback for me about things that have been helpful or things that you would like some clarification on or things that were confusing or not helpful, any of the above, I'm open to hearing about those things.
No, no, just look up.
Let's see if this is...
I don't think it's on.
Is that on?
No.
No.
Huh.
Is it received? Yeah, I see it on. We can turn down.
So this has make sure I'm looking at it correctly here. Yeah, I've got it on the top. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Try that again. So my question was, if you have questions or comments about the last two sessions, I'm open to hearing about those, what was helpful, what was confusing, what you'd like some more clarification about, anything at all that you'd like to make some comments on from those two sessions. You're very quiet and cooperative.
It wasn't here. We weren't here for the last 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
We're all groggy from the time change.
Time changes got us all. Okay. All right, well, so the main topic for, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought it helped clarify what to look for and why it's, when it's going wrong and what is going
Okay.
right.
And which part, can you say anything about any particular pieces of the last couple things that clarified what was going on in conflict for you? It's still not working?
I think it is.
Yeah, no.
It's just not turned up enough.
Yeah.
Not turned up enough? How's that? I'll just keep
Yeah.
going. There we go. AV things. It's always good to have a good AV guy here, Steve. Thank you. Okay, any you were saying it was
Well, just
helpful to
about
kind of clarify some of the issues that were going on.
Like stepping back and taking time out, you know, rather than keep going.
So in terms of, instead of emotional reactivity, being able to take time out, calm down, self-soothe, then come back in a non-reactive, more calm kind of way, more calmly connected. Okay.
You know, the way you fleshed out triangulation, boy, this whole week, I see it all over the place. It's really something else.
So for those
Yeah.
of you who
Now,
were
dealing with it is the challenge.
So briefly,
So if you could, you know, that's probably the whole course right there.
we could do a lot on the topic of triangulation. Again, triangulation was about where one group is in conflict with another group. They can't seem to resolve their conflict, and the normal way of dealing with that is the urge to triangulate in a third party to take that person, to have that person choose sides. And if the person steps into choosing sides, then what happens is the conflict that was existent diminishes, and the third person feels all the tension of it. And so it's a way that we all have the urge to get somebody on our side, but it actually is counterproductive to getting conflicts resolved. It stabilizes them. And so the more effective method is to maintain our one-on-one relationships rather than choose sides. And one of the ways we talked about that was just don't talk about people who aren't in the room. And if we maintain our conversations with the people we're talking to about us, that minimizes conflict. Yes.
And why does someone do that? I mean, is that insecurity, fear?
We just all feel anxiety about conflict, and the more it escalates, the more tense we feel, and then that anxiety can become anger, and we start feeling powerless. So we want somebody on our side to prove that we're right, to help us with our powerlessness. Yeah, because when we can't resolve conflicts, we'll often try to overpower the other person rather than understand them or help them understand us.
Seems like an unhealthy outlet.
Yeah. We see how escalation is an unhealthy thing because it doesn't resolve things, it just creates more polarization. And triangulation doesn't resolve things, it just diffuses the conflict and another person feels it. So, yeah. Okay, yes?
I thought it helped me feel better about some family interaction because I had a brain damaged husband.
Mm-hmm.
And after hearing you, I think we did probably as good as we could have dealing with that.
Well, it's nice to hear your self-acceptance with that. You know, we all have struggles in the world, don't we? Yeah. So today I want to talk a little bit about shame and how shame intensifies conflict and what we can do about it. And I understand that you Lutherans, you're Methodists, I have to hear these things secondhand. I understand that you start your worship services with confession, is that right? Okay. Do you have that memorized in some way? Is there something you say each week, or is it different from time to time? It changes some? Okay. And I understand that at the end of the confession, you have something called the words of absolution or forgiveness. Is that right? Because I've heard them before. In fact, I want to tell you a little story about them. When my grandmother, who helped raise me, first met Carrie, my wife, and first heard her lead a worship service, I don't know, 35 some odd years ago. 25, I'm sorry. Some odd years ago, we participated in the early part of the service, and we did the confessional, and Carrie said the words of absolution, and the words of absolution were,
"And as a called and ordained minister of the Church of Christ, and by his authority, I declare to you the entire forgiveness of all your sins, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit."
I declare to you the entire forgiveness of all of your sins. And my grandmother said to me, "Can she do that?" Grace is a hard thing to get our heads around. It's hard to believe. It's hard to trust. And there's a degree to which all of us really don't accept that grace. Really don't accept that we are capable of being loved for who we are right here in this moment in time, warts and all. And the degree to which we have not accepted that is the degree to which we feel a sense of shame. Shame is not what we do that's wrong, that we feel badly about. That's guilt. Guilt is about our actions, what we've done wrong. I hit you in the nose, I feel guilty about it. Shame is about who we are in the core of ourselves. It's about, do I accept who I am without judgment or not? And the degree to which we do not accept that is the degree to which we feel a sense of embarrassment about who we are, shame about who we are, and we want to hide it and show something to people that's something different than that. Okay? So, why do I talk about shame? Because it's the thing that causes us to cover up things and to fight more intensely than we would at other times. Is this loud enough now for everybody? Okay. The theologian Paul Tillich said the essence of faith is that you accept your acceptance by God. Have you ever heard that before? I just think that's a wonderful wonderful illustration of the word faith. We tend to, in confessional churches, you all say the creeds, right? I'm a non-confessional congregation person. The Methodists, we can say them, but we don't have to say them in order to belong to the Methodist Church. We're a little bit like the early Christians. They said, Jesus is Lord. If you could say that, it's okay with me. You're part of the gang. Wesley said, if your heart is as my heart, give me your hand. So just another way of saying, if you want to celebrate God's love and grace and call Jesus as Lord and Savior, as you have on your sign, that's all you have to do to be a member. You don't have to be a confessional group. You don't have to say, I believe this and this and this and this, and they're all the right things, and if you don't believe them, you're on the other group. Right? So accepting our acceptance is the critical piece here for avoiding shame. And the degree to which we do not accept our acceptance is the degree to which we have a sense of shame about who we are. Now, why is that important? That's important because we want to defend ourselves the more we feel ourselves subject to judgment or to embarrassment or to shame. And then the more intense our arguments with other people become. The more we can accept ourselves with our flaws, our limitations, our warts, the things we like about ourselves, the things we don't like about ourselves, the more we understand that other people have those same flaws and limitations, and the more a sense of connection and sameness and brotherliness and sisterliness and familyness we have with other people who are unlike us. Now, that's not the way we want to operate. We want to operate because we feel a sense of this shame. We want to operate out of a sense of righteousness.
Self-righteousness.
Excuse me?
Self-righteousness.
Self-righteousness. Well put. The word self is what we're talking about. I want to cover up this self that I don't accept, and I want to show you this self that I would like you to believe that I am. And the degree to which we operate in that self-righteousness, the more subject we are to a lot of things, and I'll talk about some of those. We want to operate on the basis of the law, rather than on the basis of grace a lot of times. We want to say, well, look at all the things that I do that make me a righteous person. And look at the things that you do that make you not. And we want to, that covers up our shame and it tries to expose yours. And this is fundamental to being human. We do this all the time. I love the passages in Paul's writings in the book of Romans around law and gospel. Have you read those passages? I'm sure. I'm tempted to read the entire sections on Romans 5, 6, and 7 just to go over those passages, because Paul talks about how we are children of Abraham, and by that he meant that Abraham trusted God when God asked him to sacrifice Isaac. He didn't just operate on the basis of his self-righteousness, on the ways in which he had tried to follow all the laws and all of that, in the same ways that Paul had, and had recognized that he failed at it. So Romans talks about Paul's struggle with himself, in the sense that he wanted to live this life of righteousness, of living up to the law, of carrying it out, and he always managed to fail. And he would talk about the things that I wish I could do, I don't, and the things that I wish I didn't do, I do, and who's going to deliver me from the body of this death? And he said, thanks be to God, that God is that kind of God who loves us in spite of our limitations. And he was struggling with himself around accepting these things within himself, his shame, and trying to come to grips with the fact that Acceptance is a gift, not an earned experience. That we either receive it as a gift or we're going to keep trying to become righteous in some way or another. So, we want to have this in-group that doesn't feel ashamed because we do all the right things and believe all the right things, and the out-group that's on the other side. And I think a really nice illustration of this is the story of Zacchaeus. Everybody knows the story of Zacchaeus. When we were little kids in Sunday school, I got a few of those pins. My mother made sure of it. Sunday school perfect attendance pins. So we learned the story of Zacchaeus, and we sang a song about Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Sycamore tree.
And he said, Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today.
Now, that's a fun little song, a fun story. Do you know who Zacchaeus was? Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And we don't like taxes so much today because they don't tend to go for what we want them to go for. In those days, they really didn't go for what they wanted to go for, because the tax collectors were independent contractors. And they got to collect as much as they could. And they got to keep everything that they weren't required to send over. So they were the despised group. And here's the story of Zacchaeus as recorded in Luke chapter 19. So Jesus entered Jericho and he was passing through it. And then there was named Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. And he was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he couldn't see, and because he was short in stature. Kindred spirit. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way, and he was watching out. And then Jesus came to the place. He looked up and he said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble and said, he's gone to be the guest of one who's a sinner. It's not like us, the sinner over there. And Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay them back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house, because he too now is a son of Abraham, a person who trusts in the forgiveness of his unrighteousness. That's not how we want to operate. We want to operate on the basis of the good guys and the bad guys, the good girls and the bad girls, and have it be that way. But we're encouraged to live out of a sense of accepting of our acceptance and grace, rather than a sense of the righteous and the unrighteous. And it flies in the face of the way we think about the world. So, let me find my notes here again, see where I was going to go with all this. There it is. So, what do we do when we don't accept ourselves and we don't accept other people? Is we, particularly if we haven't internalized a sense of self-acceptance, to cope with this sense of shame, we want to hide out. And we hide out through a sense of righteousness, showing ourselves as better than other people, or we hide out through a sense of rage. If we take that self-condemnation that we have, that feels so painful to feel, because embarrassment and shame are the most powerful negative feelings we can feel. If we want to not feel them, we can take all the power of that and we can put it against something or someone else in a very diffused kind of way. It's a way that we protect ourselves from the painful feelings of shame. You have thoughts about that?
If you're not transformed, you're projected.
Excuse me?
If you're not transformed, if you don't transform that shame,
Mhm.
you're gonna project it.
You're going to project it onto others. Yeah. You're going to think they're the people who should be ashamed, and I'm also going to not feel this hurtful, self-condemning, small kind of feeling about myself. I'm going to feel something powerful, and I'm going to take all that self-condemnation, I'm going to judge out there so I don't have to judge in here.
Is
Yes.
that the same thing as like having a big log in your eye and not being able to
That's a
see
good-
the-
That's a good illustration. The story is, Jesus says to them, you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but you miss the log in your own. Yeah. Yeah, because to the degree to which we feel these shameful things, and they're big in our experience, we don't want to look at them.
And then, do we then hold other people even to a higher standard than we would hold ourselves?
Yeah, we hold other people to the standard that we would like to hold ourselves to if we would consider ourselves as righteous. But we can never attain it, and neither can they. But we will, the more of this sense of self-non-acceptance we have, we'll project that out. Yes?
Well, what you say, is that because we hold ourselves to our intentions, what we believe, and we hold other people to their actions?
Yeah, we hold ourselves to the law, essentially, to what we believe to be right and righteous. And we don't live up to it. And we can see that other people don't live up to it, but we can blind ourselves to the ways in which we don't. We can live with a false sense of self. And I want to talk about false and true senses of self here in a minute. Yes?
So if someone criticizes you, for example, then that brings the sense of shame because you're not living up to your standards, their standards, everybody's standards.
To the degree to which we have not accepted an honest, true sense of self. Let me give you an example. I go into the office some days and I have people sit on my couch and they say, Dr. Austill, I have seen 18 psychologists in my life, and you are the absolute best psychologist I have ever seen in my life. You're just amazing. You should be on Oprah. And I go home and I say to my wife, you are such a lucky woman. And she says, why don't you go back to work? If I take that in and believe it, my own sense of myself can dramatically change. We call that a reflected sense of self. You tell me who I am. I look in your mirror and I see who I am. If I believe that rather than having an authentic, honest sense of self, then I will be subject to inflation. The amazing thing, however, is I go back to the office and the next day somebody sits on the couch and says, Dr. Austill, I've seen 18 psychologists. And you are the absolute worst. Why did they ever give you a license? You don't know anything about what you're doing, you crazy man. And I'll go home and I'll say to my wife, how could you ever have married a man like me? It's just amazing. You're such a saint.
And she says,
She says you should come home from work more often. Because you bolster my sense of myself. So we call those things reflected senses of self. And to the degree to which we depend upon other people to tell us that we are acceptable and lovable, we are subject to those ups and downs. And the degree to which we have not come to grips with our own limitations and received the acceptance and forgiveness for those things, the more subject we are to people's either inflated views of us or condemning views of us. People can get away with trying to shame us if we haven't accepted this. Yes?
But doesn't a sense of ourselves does come from other people, and the trick is to filter out the incorrect reflections of yourself, or?
Yeah, well, particularly at first, when we are children, our sense of ourself is entirely dependent on the people around us. They tell us who we are and whether we are valuable and lovable as we are, or whether we are only valuable and lovable if we do certain things or act certain ways or become like they are. It's a rare thing for families to operate out of a high level of grace, of self-acceptance, and accepting that about other people, to let people be who they are and to love them, not just because they behave properly, but because of love is a gift, and we just either offer it or we don't. Because none of us can ever deserve it, right? I mean, we'd like to believe we can. We'd like to believe that if we just behave in certain ways, everybody will love us.
Yeah.
But in fact, people love not because we deserve to be loved or we've done something to get loved. People love because they've received grace and love, and they then choose to offer it as a gift.
That's the ideal one.
That's love, right? The rest of it's pretty conditional, and it depends upon the degree to which we've accepted our acceptance, received grace, and live within it, or not. So it's a challenge to live within that and to live that out. Jesus with Zacchaeus approaches Zacchaeus as a person, I would use the term, of sacred worth. Even though everybody else sees Zacchaeus as the epitome of evil, Jesus relates to him as a person of sacred worth. So it's just not living within his own sense of acceptance by God. He's also saying, I'm going to act as though you are lovable as you are, even though you're not living it out. I'm going to relate to you as a lovable person that's worthy of sacred attention right here and right now. And Jesus was famous for this all the time, right? He's going around loving people that other people said, "What? You don't understand. This is one of the people on the outside." You know, he's famous for it. Yes.
Where do you put the construct that's sort of famously infamous of the mask, the internal mask?
Mm-hmm.
There's a person inside.
Right.
Who that is.
Right.
And there's the world out there.
Right.
You have to show a face.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you put that? How does that reflect back and forth?
That's really good. I'm trying to think of what Jung called that. I think he called it anima. Anyway, we do have this.
The Eugene O'Neill play, the Greek God round, but
Okay.
nobody wears a mask.
Yeah, we have this. We would like. I was on the phone to our youngest daughter, who's in graduate school over in California, and she's really a sharp student. I've never seen anybody quite like her. And she gets asked to do a lot of things because she's good at academic stuff. But then she says to me on the phone, "What if they find out I don't know all this stuff?" Sort of the feeling I had when I was preparing for this class. Carrie said, "Oh, people really liked your last couple of sessions." I thought, "Oh my God, what if I don't live up to it this time around? You know, then what'll they think of me, right?" Because I want to have this persona out there, this mask that you think of me as this competent, intelligent, wise old man. You know? And in reality, I'm a person who struggles with these exact same things, the self-acceptance and the trying to live out graceful acceptance and gifting of other people of love, even though I don't feel like we struggle with these things. And so we go around, particularly when we don't have a sense of acceptance from people, or we expect that they're going to be judgmental, and we show them a righteous self of some sort, some persona, some image of what we would like to be seen as by them, rather than getting real. Sort of like when you go to somebody's house for dinner and everything is immaculate. And you walk in, and how do you feel when it's a little tense and uncomfortable and everything's in its place, and do I fit in this? But if you go to dinner and people greet you there and the house is a little messy and they say, come on in, relax. They accept their flaws and limitations, and they're relaxed about it. They are graceful to themselves. Oh, let's have a party. Let's relax and enjoy. This is comfortable.
Kind of a nice balance maybe in between.
A little cleanliness and a little acceptance. Yeah. And so actually, I'll use that as an illustration, because I think love comes in two forms. One is the form of grace, acceptance, support. And the other comes in the form of challenge. Grow. Become more than you are right now. You're never going to live up to the law and fulfill it, so you might as well give up on that. But if you want to keep trying, you'll live out of the shame. But if you accept the acceptance and then challenge yourself to grow, you might grow into those fruits of the Spirit that I keep trying to talk about each of these sessions. You remember the fruits of the Spirit again?
Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity.
Gentleness, kindness, and self-control. Love, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. If we're challenging ourselves with an honest sense of self-appraisal and trying to become like those fruits of the Spirit, we can grow into it. But it depends on that foundational sense of, what are those words again that you would say as the words of absolution? I declare to you the entire forgiveness of all your sins. To live out of it, we have to live that level of acceptance in order to challenge ourselves to grow. And most people do. When I do therapy with people, they come into my office, I don't say, "Whoa, you're such a mess. Let me, I don't know if I can do this. I've had some challenges before." Regardless of who it is, and no matter how much most people would want to judge the person for the behaviors that they have done, there has to be a level of acceptance and joining with the person and understanding who they are before there's any ability to entertain the possibility of being challenged to grow. And we're all like that. We want to be accepted before we have somebody challenge us. If somebody just walks up to us and we don't know them at all and they immediately challenge us, we're very defensive about it. So, dealing with ourselves and receiving this is foundational to being real with other people rather than having to be self-righteous or to operate out of a sense of shame. I just don't have anything to offer. I'm such a worm. And people who have been traumatized live out of that sense of shame. When they are treated as though they are not worthy of being human, then they internalize a sense of that, and shame becomes absolutely debilitating. And I won't get into ways of dealing with trauma kinds of shame, but shame can do either make us think we're worms or make us live out of a sense of self-righteousness. And those intensify the conflicts with people, because if I'm relating to you and I'm saying I'm the righteous one, and we know you're not quite living up to it, then our conversations quickly become about the value of people, and we want to defend ourselves in some kind of way. And so much of our discourse in public these days is around righteousness and shame kinds of dynamics, and then they intensify a great deal. Let's see what else I've got here. So,
Glasses fixed.
I got my glasses fixed, yes. I went in yesterday and gave me a new frame, so that was really nice. I guess I want to talk about, say a little bit about a friend of mine. This fellow, his name's Mark Miller. He's a United Church of Christ conference minister, sort of a bishop, you know, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, Mark came and heard me preach in Breckenridge several decades ago, and I used a fishing illustration, and he came up to me afterward because he's a fly fisherman, and so we've been fly fishing ever since then. Well, Mark has a habit that it's kind of appealing, and I've started to try to take it on myself. And Mark flies around the country a lot in his work as conference minister. He's retired, but he still does this work. And what he does is in every airport or place that he goes, he looks for the person who looks like they have the lowliest status in the place and who's the most underappreciated person. And he deliberately makes it a point to go over to them and say, thank you for doing what you're doing here. He treats them as people of sacred worth. And he's told stories about what happens when this occurs. And how so many people have never had somebody treat them as though they were a valuable human being. And the powerful impact that it can make in ascribing value to people, the value that God has for his creation, to people who are constantly not given that value by the rest of humanity. And what a touching, powerful thing it is. When we deal with ourselves out of a sense of grace and acceptance, then we are less prone to shame and self-righteousness. When we deal with other people out of that same sense of grace and honoring their value in the face of things, there's a respect that disarms people and that allows them to be their true selves in the face of that kind of acceptance. And it de-escalates the intensity of conflicts around righteousness and rage, and helps people to have communication together. I could go on about this, but I want to just stop and hear some of your thoughts or questions about this. What do you think about this business of diffusing conflict by accepting your own acceptance and by recognizing the value in others, even if they're not being their better selves? Yes?
I can track your idea of shame, and I can see how I deal with that, or try to deal with it. I'm aware of some things I've done incorrectly. I have some guilt, and I can identify that a little bit. I don't identify very many righteous things I've done, I'm afraid. But you've not used the word ego, and I'm trying to tie these ideas together in how I view ego.
Oh, okay.
And I know that ego drives me, and I want people to have a good opinion of me. So I certainly stress those elements. I try not to reveal too much of the shame side.
Oh, you're pretty unusual.
Yeah.
They're all confessors.
So I wonder if you comment a little bit how you tie ego to these elements.
Ego's a language that I don't typically use a lot. It
Yes.
came out of Freudian
Yeah.
psychology initially, and it did have something to do with this public persona in a way, but it was also the integrating internal piece that struggled with issues of superego, which were societal rules and laws about the ways we should behave, and our primitive urges of various kinds, aggression, sex, we can make a list of them. And so the idea was that the ego was this organizing principle internally that dealt with this conflict between trying to live out what was expected of us and our urges to please ourselves at every turn. Is that it?
Yeah.
And so there are other ways of thinking about ego. So it was this public persona in some ways, but it was also the sort of integrated person, the person who became who they wanted to be. And the more that person was in charge, rather than just doing what other people wanted or just doing whatever urge we had, then there was more of a sense of ego or self. And ego psychology eventually became what's called self-psychology. And it had to do with this formation of a self that we're talking about here today. Because it's the formation of who we are when we are in relationship to people. That acceptable sense of self that we bring that determines the nature of the relationships we have with people. So is that getting at some of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So are there tools, like when you say to integrate yourself, about the fact that
Mm-hmm.
basically it's telling yourself that you're okay, that who you are.
Being honest with yourself about your strengths and your weaknesses, we all have them. Receiving grace about your weaknesses, your shortcomings, those kinds of things, being honest about that so you confess it, you receive the forgiveness for it, and then in the midst of that forgiveness and acceptance, you want to become more, better, a different, more integrated person, so that the things you say you believe in, you're actually living them out in your life, right? We call that in Christian circles, the first one's justification by grace. We're made right with God. The second one we call sanctification, the process of growing in grace and becoming more like those fruits of the Spirit. So,
Okay, so you're saying, like, say someone criticizes you, and you can back off and say, this is not about me or whatever.
well, I need to ask myself first.
Yeah.
I can just say, oh, you're
Right.
always wrong if you criticize me.
Yeah.
That's not my, because
Right.
you understand I'm righteous. Yeah.
Yeah, so then if you say, okay, well, maybe I did X, it's
Mhm.
acknowledging that,
Mhm.
and then,
Yeah. In our marriages, we're not always our better selves, right? Don't tell
our classic, the closest to home.
Yeah, that's the place where it's the most difficult, is those closest relationships. We can have strangers think all sorts of wonderful things about us, but they don't live with us, right? So, but our spouses see our limitations and would like to show them to us as well to get us to
Point
change.
them out.
Excuse me?
Point them out.
Point them out, yes. If you would just change this. We always would like the people around us to be the ones to change and grow, so we don't have to so much. Because it's hard to challenge ourselves to grow. We get caught in shame or guilt or self-righteousness, and then we don't want to do that. We want everybody else to change. But for us to be honest with ourselves about it, I'm not loving you well in those kinds of ways, and I need to accept that. Please forgive me. I'll try to receive forgiveness for that. So I'm living in a sense of acceptance and grace and commitment from you. And then I will try to grow in that way, be honest about the ways in which I need to struggle with myself, as Paul was talking about, in order to grow in grace and in.
So if you see, say, for example, a child who you think has low self-esteem, how would you approach helping them more internalize that they're okay?
Well, how
Just
would
by
you
saying-
do that? How would you do that? Each of us has those encounters with people, children, otherwise.
But you can say, oh, you're fine, or you should believe in yourself and whatever, but
Right.
they aren't gonna internalize that because that's not what they believe.
Right, and with children, they're most dramatically affected by the closest family relationships. So we're going to have limited ability to influence that in those times, but we have some. And it's not so much about what we say to people that gives them a sense of self-worth. It's the way we relate to people that gives them a sense of self-worth.
That's scary.
If we're having a conversation and I say, yeah, okay, well, somebody else got something to say. It doesn't matter so much what I say to you, but if I pay attention to you and I act as though you're important and you have some things to say that are valuable in here, and I'm behaving as though you're worthy, you've got some worth there, you're going to feel more of it. And so, whether it's a child who has no sense of self-worth, or it's a bully, or whomever, to treat them as though they are valuable, but not more valuable than everybody else, because they're no more righteous than any of the rest of us are. Right? So, yes?
Good question. I like your distinction between shame and guilt. For instance, when you're talking about, we have the absolution, the forgiveness of sin. And is that, I mean, I can understand how you ask for forgiveness for things that we have done and that we have not done.
Right.
But you're not asking for forgiveness for my shame.
But in fact, this is the question about what is sin, because we think about sin in so oftentimes as a list of things that you're not supposed to do, where you break the law, right? And if you break various laws, then you are sinning.
Right.
But sin is really talked about in other ways too. It's talked about in terms of who we are in relation to God, the way in which we are separated, the way in which our self is incomplete without God, or we have turned away from God, and in that absence of relationship we are lacking. There are a variety of ways of talking about sin that has to do with who we are. In certain circles, there are views of fallen humanity, right? There are others that think of sin as separation, but it has to do with the sense of self in relation rather than just the actions that we do or don't do.
So are we asking for forgiveness for that sense of shame, or I mean,
we're asking for acceptance for that sense of shame. Accept your acceptance, the receiving of the gift that you have been made in your Creator's image, and you are invited to live it out. Would be a way of saying it, I think. Any other theologians in the room are happy to have you jump in. I don't have all the answers to everything. Yes. Although I will try to pretend I do.
You must deal with lots of folk who are not Christian in terms of their faith. Where do you find a sense of acceptance and self-forgiveness, etc., if not through the grace and love of God? When I look out at the world and I see all this conflict and all this hatred, and then you think, well, obviously these people aren't finding this from their relationship to God and that sense of love, unconditional, the grace and the forgiveness. Where do you find it?
I think it's much easier to find it when we seek an encounter with God, or respond to God's seeking an encounter with us. That our spirituality is a deep well resource for these things, but many people don't think of themselves as practicing forms of spirituality in our culture especially. And here in the Western states we have much more unchurched people, but people are spiritual beings. And so people struggle with these issues of acceptance and shame and guilt, and trying to get a sense of an acceptable sense of self, but it's just we do it in a variety of ways, and most of us do it. I guess there's a person who studies shame. I'm trying to think of her name.
Brene Brown.
Very well done. Good, quick mind there. Brene Brown. And she talks about how in our culture we try to overcome this sense of shame, get an acceptable sense of self through a couple of ways, and women tend to do it by trying to do everything well. What's that old TV slogan about cook the bacon, and there's a list of things that women were supposed to do and then come home and treat you like a man. It was an impossible list of being confident in everything. And men, she talks about, tend to get this sense through power, invulnerability, things like that. So we have certain ways that will work a little bit to give us an acceptable sense of self, but they never quite get there. And we can always compare ourselves negatively to the people around us. It's so easy to say, oh, that person's so much smarter, and it's really easy to do. But we get a sense of it through sense of accomplishment, education, beauty. We go down a long list of things that give us some sense of self-worth, and then we can, and other people telling us those things, and we can build on it through a meaningful lives or some sense of spirituality. But I think Christianity, with its message of grace, is a very, very, very powerful thing. So I don't try to convert everybody that I see in therapy, but I do encourage people to develop their spirituality, whatever that is for them. And I do ask them the questions, these kinds of questions about what's meaningful in life. How do you get a sense of your self-acceptance? I have them struggle with those kinds of questions so that they begin to think about it and look at the ways in which that comes about. Yes?
But you could be, or someone could be an ISIS fighter killing people and feel that they have a wonderful relationship with God.
Sure.
And they're doing, so it's in your head.
Yeah. There are lots of people who don't live out of very much of a life of grace or of the fruits of the Spirit, who think of themselves as particularly righteous. I mean, Jesus was running into them all the time. There are people who say, I'm righteous because I believe all the right things. And you remember some of the folks in the Jewish community came up to Jesus and they said, let me pose you a little question. There's this guy and he dies, and then his wife marries his brother, and then that one dies, and there are 7 of them, and who's she married to in the afterlife? Let's see if you get this one right. So we can have a sense of self-righteousness in our spirituality, thinking that we are righteous because we believe the right things, or we can have a sense of self-righteousness in our spirituality because we do the right things, or we can have a sense of righteousness in our spirituality because it is imparted to us as a gift that we didn't do anything to deserve. It's just counted as righteousness, like Abraham's faith. That's what makes people children of Abraham. Yes?
I think that's why Paul's story is so powerful, because he was a righteous Pharisee and he was stoning, at least at stonings of Christians, and on his way to one.
When he gets knocked off his donkey.
When he gets knocked off and has a life-transforming experience of grace and acceptance. The mystery I've always struggled with is kind of your question about how come some people have those experiences like Paul did,
Mhm.
and some don't? I mean, the vast majority of people don't have those huge, mountaintop oneness experiences. Many do, but not all. And so maybe that's why we keep coming to church, to hear the good news, to hear this eternal love that will not let you go, that, like Pastor Chad said, so big, you couldn't even make this up. So,
And we want
You know-
to believe it even if we
we want
fully,
to, and yeah,
because
that's
it's
why,
so good.
that's why I appreciate communities that proclaim that week after week after week. Because
Yes.
we might get it for an instant and then forget it again. We just need to be permeated with it.
The other thing too is I think that God puts in front of us numbers of occasions to come down on trees.
Come down out of our trees.
Yeah, come down out of our trees. I mean, the numbers of people that before us, numbers of opportunities to be invited into that grace time and time again.
Thanks, Alice.
And hopefully we are a part of that outreach to people where we treat them in those ways, where we say you are valuable even if you're not righteous because you didn't live up to it or you don't believe the right things, but I'm going to relate to you in that way so you have an imparted sense of value and you experience yourself as accepted and loved in spite of everything, and then maybe you will grow as well, or have the ability to look at yourself. Yes?
As visitors today, I haven't been blessed by a child with water before. If you all experienced that, it is really powerful. It's just like, he had no idea who I am, and he's just slapping that water on my head. and it's like, it's just an embodiment of what you're talking about.
Yes.
That you are blessed. I don't have a clue who you are, but already you have been accepted and you are a God's child. Very, very powerful for me.
I had that exact experience last week after communion. I went through the line and a little girl put the sign of the cross on my head. I was just like, you don't have a clue what you're doing, and I probably don't either.
It's all a mystery anyway.
Yeah.
I have one question that's been difficult for me. I totally get what you're saying around the acceptance, but sometimes you're bullied.
Yeah.
And I get what you're saying about you don't want to collapse into shame and victimization with a bully, nor do you want to become like them. Like Gandhi said, we become what we hate, right? But could you say something about, I think boundaries are really important, and that may be a sense of self-worth, where there have been times in my life where I couldn't find my voice to say, until you can treat me with respect, the conversation's over.
Right.
I don't know, that's been
It's a
hard
good
for me.
question. We talked last time a bit about assertiveness and ways to deal with aggressive people who want to win. They're against us and for themselves. We can tend to be passive against ourselves to please other people. And the ways in which we can become assertive, which are to value ourselves in relationships, speak up about what it is we do want rather than what we don't want, and then claim power over ourselves to decide what we will make ourselves do and what we will not make ourselves do. No, I will not let you take my money or take advantage of me in this way because I have power over whether I give it to you or not. I may choose to if you have the gun in my face in this moment in time, but when I'm not afraid like that, I have more and more power over myself to limit you being able to make me do things that I don't want to make myself do. It's a quick answer to it.
No, thank you.
But we're faced with aggressive people a lot in the world, and they would love to bully us, to bowl us over, to take power over us. It's our best defense is that we have power over ourselves. And for those who will take advantage of people at every turn, the narcissists and the extreme sociopaths, fortunately we have systems in place to protect us. We have courts and jails and a variety of things like that, that we use force to deal with those people so that they don't use force against others in hurtful ways.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I know, John, I saw your hand go halfway.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
As, community of faith, you know, you're a pastor for decades and you know, career switch in the middle, but what are the best practices for a community of faith to do, things to do to embody what you're talking about for health and for people's baptismal identities? That's what I hear. You know, allowing people to be who they are and to own that, and helping people to be who they are and to own that. You have some wisdom for if you were to give three things to
try.
That's another CFD check.
It's like a big ball in a tee, and you
Yeah.
hit it and walk away. Yeah.
So I'll say two things. One is reminding ourselves who we are, that we are people in need of grace, and we come together in need of grace, seeking to receive it, and reminding ourselves that's our core identity. It's not that we're righteous people or we believe the right things. That Christians aren't perfect, they're forgiven or something. But we're always needing to be receiving that and reminding each other of it and trying to offer it if we are going to function at our best. And the other is that we continually seek to grow in grace and we become the people that God would like us to be, knowing full well we'll never live up to the laws, but that we may become, ourselves may become more embodying of these things so that when people encounter us out there, that is our witness in your words here. I saw a thing on witness or serve Christ in the world. It's not that we go out and convince people that they should be Lutherans from the Midwest or whatever Methodists from. It's that we embody in the self that we are becoming something that speaks words of grace and hope and love to people. That's the best I can come up with at the moment. Okay. Well, thank you all for your attendance and participation and giving me a chance to struggle and rethink through these things again. I appreciate it and wish you well on the journey.